Thank you for tuning in to this recording of our live webinar presented on Friday, February 11th, 2022. Combat dry conditions was the topic of conversation. And we were fortunate enough to have my little brother, Terry Aberhart, president and founder of Sure Growth on there, and Tyler Lefley, agronomic advisor at Sure Growth on the call as well. And the one and only agri-coach Elston Solberg, and they touched on the big picture of how to move forward with conditions this spring, how to make the most of your soil nutrients and health, what are the stresses causing yield loss, and what to do about that, and some very interesting concepts. And the conversation grew from just Elston and Terry and Tyler to some of the other agronomists in our network that had some really interesting things to say about the topic from their perspective. Grant Mickelson from Watrous, Mark Gordon from Melfort joined the call as well, and then Rob Sake said a few words, and we had great questions and feedback all throughout it. So I think you're really going to enjoy it. It's well worth your time. I just want to take a minute and ask you to check out some of the Aberhart family of companies online. AberhartFarms.com. You can learn more about our farming operation in Saskatchewan there. Sure Growth. You can find out more about the precision agronomy consulting services offered there. And convergencegrowth.com is one of the newer members of the family, where they accelerate solutions across food, health, and agriculture, basically like a startup accelerator. And then Aberhart Ag Solutions.ca, that's where we deliver one of a kind fertility solutions of the future to your farm. And last but not least, of course, the Growing the Future podcast.ca, where we speak to progressive folks in the industry that are transforming agriculture as we know it. Enjoy the webinar.
Our key things around managing dry conditions, and some of these may seem, fairly basic, but a lot of times we miss out on them. So, number one thing obviously is just soil testing with dry conditions and lower yields in a lot of cases from last year that carry over nitrogen and fertilizer. Even on our own farm, we see probably a range of 75 pounds of nitrogen from the highest to the lowest fields at today's value. That's about $75 an acre. And probably about 50 pounds of nitrogen on average more than normal or than the year before. So those things obviously are just really incredibly valuable. When we think about managing the overall inputs of the farm, which is what we do as agronomy coaches. Today we're looking at probably $250 an acre potential inputs, and hopefully growing a crop that's probably worth anywhere between $600 and $1,000 an acre. So just on a 10,000 acre farm, to put that in perspective, that's about $2.5 million worth of inputs and about $8 million of revenue, maybe on average. And typically a good solid agronomy program is, 2 or 3% or less of your input costs, and, maybe 1% of the total production or revenue that you can influence. So, just putting into perspective the value of what we're managing, and as input costs have increased, and maybe in some cases we can't even get as much as you may need, allocating that in an efficient way is really important. So using things like variable rate fertilizer plans that we know on average 25% of fields are, kind of lower producing and don't need nearly as much fertilizer, using things like variable rate fungicide applications or desiccation, those kind of things. And also identifying, what areas of the field aren't producing or negative margin that you should take out of production. I think some of the other key, simple, basic things thinking about in dry conditions is things like seeding depth, your speed. Those are factors that we've seen in the last year was really important. Herbicide resistance and carryover in dry conditions is super critical. Getting your shadow out on that crop, right? Insects can accelerate really quickly in hot and dry conditions. So whether it's your own shadow or your coach's shadow or a virtual shadow using digital tools, some things to think about there. And then of course, coming up after this call, the crop intelligence weather stations have been a huge, great tool to use to help identify the potential of the crop. Lots of times there's maybe more potential there than you think, or if it really is, pretty tough out there, the weather stations will help you have more clarity on that. And even on our own farm, across 16,000 acres in about a 30-mile kind of spread from tip to tip, we had probably 5 inches difference in rainfall from one area to the farm to another. And there's a lot of variability out there. So those are just some of the key kind of high level things to keep in mind. And in today's world, with the value of inputs and the value of our crops, these agronomic strategies and technology and tools are just becoming a lot more valuable and a lot greater returns. I'm really excited to see what we're going to hear and learn from the gurus here today. So.
Okay, over to you, Mr. Sun Mountain. Take it away.
All righty then. Good morning, everybody. I think everything that Terry just talked about, I don't know, we got a full screen there, boys and girls?
Looking good. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Looking good. All right, so in the next 10 or 15 minutes or so, I'm going to cover quite a few of the things that Terry just talked about. And basically, I'm kind of a glass half full guy pretty much all the time. And sometimes that's a really good thing and sometimes it isn't. But what I do know for this particular year, whoops, we're not actually there. There we go. I've been at this game for 42 years. Just did the math the other day. At least I will be at that place in a few weeks when I have my next birthday. And the way I look at 2022 is it's the biggest opportunity that I've ever seen in my career. And Terry touched on a bunch of that stuff. We've got an overabundance of nutrients in some cases in the soil. We've got extremely high crop prices. And I've had the opportunity to look at hundreds and hundreds of soil tests over the last few months, many of them from people that otherwise haven't soil tested much. And I'm going to use one part of one farm as an example in a few minutes, but on average, using today's value of nitrogen fertilizer, just nitrogen alone, there's anywhere between $100 and $140 plus worth of nitrogen sitting in the soil, which most growers don't recognize as even there because they don't soil test. And overlay that in a lot of geographies in the fall, there was that cheap anhydrous. So a lot of growers went out and put on 60 to 100 pounds of additional cheap anhydrous, and I use the word cheap in quotes, to add to the amount of nutrients that are in the soil. And we also know that last year, if you only had a 50% crop, that means about 50% of the phosphorus and potassium and other stuff is carrying forward. So with some really simple agronomics, the combination of a lot of stored soil nutrients because of the heat and the drought last year, plus some of the carry forward, is a great opportunity to still agronomically capture some very high commodity prices with moderate inputs. And Terry talked about that already. Most of the industry doesn't recognize this because most of the industry doesn't soil test or tissue test. And if there's any year where we should use as many of the analytical tools as possible, it's this year for sure, because again, it's the biggest opportunity, I believe, in my career. The other piece is those of you that are using crop intelligence, and I'm going to hopefully get to an example from Terry's farm towards the end, or maybe not. I've changed things this morning. But what we've learned from crop intelligence with 3,000 probe years of data thereabouts is that from the time of removal to the time of installation, so the removal in the fall and installation in the spring, typically there will be 3 to 5 inches of crop available water recharge. And so if we all remember, every inch after the factory will grow roughly 6 bushels of canola or 8 bushels of wheat. knowing that you're going to capture 3 to 5 inches of fall rain, winter snow, and spring rain, that adds to the equation quite nicely. And as Terry pointed out, there's a lot of variability across fields that have probes, which means there's at least as much variability across fields that don't have probes. So the bottom line message there is, let's figure out how to get some rough idea of how much crop available water is in the soil. So it's a big opportunity. The other piece is, remember the Birch Effect. Last year was a huge Birch Effect year. And the Birch Effect basically is when you get pulses of moisture, and these pulses happen towards the end of the season or after the season, the soil gets kind of like steroided up, and the amount of nutrients, especially nitrogen, that gets released and becomes available is quite large. And so there's that impact from last year as well. And at the end of the day, if we do this all right, instead of leaving all of this money on the table, we'll actually be able to capture the big opportunity, as I see it at least. So what to do? Terry already talked about this. Basically, if you haven't soil test and focus on nitrogen, how much nitrogen is in the bank, and that's pretty obvious. The other one is, I think with a few different farms, what I've done is I've just reallocated phosphorus across farms, and when I've done that, this potential savings is astronomical as well. So we could look at the phosphorus levels and rank our fields according to phosphorus. And if there's ever been a year where as many growers as possible should be using Jumpstart, this is the year. And it occurred to me yesterday when I was working some people's minds in Lethbridge that Jumpstart was one of the very first biologicals ever developed in Western Canada. Obviously inoculants were before that, but Jumpstart was after that. And Jumpstart replaces 15 to 20 pounds of fertilizer or soil phosphorus. And while I don't advocate the use of it in a long-term basis, I certainly do in a year when you're staring at $1 per pound phosphorus, etc. So that's a no-brainer. Of course, there's a lot of people don't know anything about it and don't know where to get it and blah, blah, blah. Measuring soil water, already talked about that. Tissue testing. So the first response most growers are going to have is they're going to cut back on their nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, and everything else. And then it's going to rain, and then they're going to have a yield positive situation. And we need to get into a place where we can react. And the best way to do that is through the use of tissue tests. And once we have those tissue tests, then we need to be ready for in-crop applications of whatever it might be that is limiting that enhanced yield potential. And I think the biggest opportunity in 2022 is that if we can intelligently manage the stockpile of nutrients that are in the soil, that's going to free up some cash that we otherwise, we could use for other purposes. And depending on the situation, some of these purposes are long-term fixes, tile drainage, lime, VRing of PK and micronutrients across fields, rock systems, minimum till deep ripping, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So there's lots of opportunities in that regard too, just reallocating those saved resources into something that's going to have a much longer impact. Picking one of my favorites, liming, if we do a good job of that in the right fields, that effect is going to last 10 to 20 years, and the amortized cost is quite low. So I'm going to give you an example of what I'm looking at. Here is 4 fields from a guy that I just started working with very, very recently. And so here are some soil tests, only to 6 inches. And all I want you to focus in on are the green boxes. So we've got some really strong organic matter levels. We've got some astronomical nitrogen levels, with the exception of one field, which was actually peas last year. We've got phosphorus through the roof. So the strategy of reducing the amount of nitrogen that gets applied for this year is solid. The strategy of cutting back on phosphorus to maybe a starter or less than a starter with some Jumpstart is solid. And the thing is, this just keeps going on for field after field. But if you're looking at these numbers for a 6-inch sample, let's just use the first field. We're looking at about 90 pounds of nitrogen in that top 6 inches. So the rule of thumb across many labs is to guesstimate to 2 feet, you multiply by 2. So this field's sitting on 180 pounds of nitrogen. And if you look at the organic matter, it's 6.7, and we're using an ENR of 7. So that's another 47-ish pounds of nitrogen. And the grower knew this stuff, but along came the cheap, in quotations, anhydrous, and he put on another 80 pounds. So right now he's looking at a tsunami of nitrogen in a very unbalanced situation. And so my job as a coach is to encourage him to look into other options to help get this field through 2022 and capture some of that cash. So this is 4 fields. Here's a bunch more fields, same farm, only part of the farm. Nitrogen levels are really high. Phosphorus levels are typically quite strong. Organic matter levels are quite strong. There are exceptions, and the lower fields are fields that had pulses on them last year. And so just an example of the strategy possibly working. Now, if we dig deeper and we think about some of the other things that I said, the opportunities to reallocate resources, and I've seen this again in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fields. This is a particularly wild one in that pHs are a huge issue here. So one of the long-term reallocations would be pH correction. Also, copper levels and especially boron levels are like crazy low. So the grower hasn't used lime before, hasn't used copper or boron before. So as an agronomist or a coach, there's a great opportunity here to look like a wizard if we can convince the grower to reallocate those resources into some of these other issues that are very, very pressing in the short term and more importantly in the long term. I'm going to switch to water. These are probes from Terry's farm. I think there's 7 of them. I just ordered them in range of crop available water at the time of removal. And so here's one field, here's another field, here's another field. I'll get all 7 up. And you can see that there's quite a range, and Terry already alluded to this because he's probably been looking at his moisture probes regularly. And so there is about a 5-inch variation from the lowest field in terms of crop available water to the best field. And that's cool. But here's where it gets really cool, is when we start adding in the potential water-driven yield potential from the lowest field to the highest field, and it turns out to be about 30 bushels of yield difference based on the data that we collected at removal. Now we can add in that 3 to 5 inches of typical overwinter charge to that, and we can have a much better idea of where we're at in terms of water-driven yield potential on a field-by-field basis when we start seeding. And to just take this a little bit further, I know many of you on this call are utilizing crop intelligence, but you can get other information in terms of how much moisture is being stored in the soil profile at the time of removal. But here's the one that is really cool, and it's just a random field that I picked from that selection, and I'm using some really low numbers. We know that Terry and his crew have been managing at a high level for a while, but I'm trying to lowball this thing, which is against my nature. So we're saying this field has got medium productivity, and we're downplaying the amount of overwinter precipitation. We're only saying it's going to be 50% of normal. And boom, we put in the numbers, and there you go at 50% precipitation next year with 50% precipitation in the winter. We're still staring at 52 to 60 bushels of canola. And we could do that same thing with all of those fields. And so once again, you know, the coffee talk is all about, and the papers are all full about, it's a drought, it's a drought, it's a drought, it's going to be a drought, it's going to be a worse drought. And basically a lot of that's not based on much information. We got to get way more granular, that's for sure. So I think this is where I hand off to you, Tyler.
Yep.
Is that correct? Is that correct?
Can we just
Yeah.
answer some of the questions now before we continue on? Would that work, Elson?
Yeah, I'm good with whatever.
So we had a question here from Mitchell McPherson. Manure field, can synthetic pea build soil pea that high? I'm not sure if you need more context there.
Well, those fields have never had a history of manure, but they've had a long history of, strangely enough, probably over application of phosphorus year after year after year after year, just because that was the recipe. And one of the things about those particular fields is low pH will drive the analytical P up as well. So it's a little bit of a false confidence on the P side, but no manure here.
Okay, and the second question we had here was from Edgar Hammermeister, who was saying he's unfamiliar with the anachronism of ENR.
Estimated nitrogen release. So for every % organic matter you have in the soil, that organic matter will release a certain amount of nitrogen for this year's crop. And so for your region, I just picked a 7. So if you've got 7% organic matter, you take 7% and you multiply by 7, that gives you a release of about 49 pounds of nitrogen that will go to yield. Estimated nitrogen release.
Sweet. I'm just, for the purposes of the recording here, going to share Terry's comments. We know from trial work we have done in the past that if you apply too much nitrogen or just crank nitrogen without keeping balance of other nutrients, there can be a tipping point where you actually cause a reduction of yield. This is worst case example of increasing cost and reducing revenue. That's not much fun. With high costs of nutrients, we have mainly been focused on the residual value. Elston's comments reminded me that we could have situations where we're putting on too much high price fertilizer and impacting your farm margins. So that's a good real world comment there. Love the interaction. Please, folks, as we go, feel free to comment and ask questions. I just can't help but wonder, what are all these agronomists on the call thinking about the upcoming year? I mean, Terry, you tell me, look at all these folks on the call. Like, who should we pick on here? I'm really wondering who's.
Yeah, there's lots. There'll be lots of good discussions and questions here, I'm sure. So
if we have a little bit of time, I'm thinking maybe we could, if some of the agronomists have anything they want to contribute, maybe put your hand up and we'll pick on you quick and find out if there's anything specific you're doing to address the situation or what you're finding in your region too. I think would be of interest and value to everybody. But we'll let Tyler do his presentation here. Thanks, Elston. That's some great thinking. Take it away, Tyler.
Yeah, you betcha. So Elston, as always, crushing the agronomics. I'm just going to kind of give everybody a quick review here, kind of, and go over our stress list. We saw a lot of it this summer, especially when it came to heat, but, in years past, it's been, a bit of both when it comes to water, those early season frosts and those seasons where we don't get enough heat units. So with stresses, it's always about too little or too much. And then also in our soil conditions, we usually don't think about it too much, but things like salinity, soil structure, and pH do affect it. And we definitely saw that in Elston's slide there, especially when you get into acidic conditions, right? So the best way to think about stress is to, figure out and apply it to kind of how we deal with as people. So you have your escape, your avoidance, and your tolerance. If I'm escaping, I'm saying, God bless, I'll see you in Tucson. I'm golfing this winter. When it comes to, avoidance, it's all about bringing back the umbrella hats and the pasty sunscreen to get out of the sun. And then tolerance, of course, you're going to get, burnt to a crisp, and your friends can no longer shake your hand and they're always slapping you on the back. You chug Gatorade or you hang out in the pool in the water to cool off. So when we think about, humans and then apply that to our plants, it's always our kind of main way to think about it. Okay, the plants escape. It's either you escape the really stressful stages of reproduction to avoid the abiotic stress, because if you can't reproduce, your evolutionary line is done. So you're deleted off the planet. And if we think about avoidance, these plants have evolved over millennia to have different photosynthetic pathways, which is why we have C3, C4, and CAM plants. And when it comes to tolerating, we look at plants in the desert, they're essentially the sloths of productivity, because cell division is completely slowed down to, minuscule rates. So in order to put this into a beautiful flow chart, which this publication did, it goes more in depth on the plant mechanisms for avoidance, tolerance, and escaping. But I really want to let everybody know that when it comes to the breeder's ability to focus in on certain traits, the escape routes is what they're able to do. So early flowering, maturity, and overall high photosynthetic capacity, which can also be reflected through overall biomass. So I want to go on to a slide here that really caught my attention lately, because I was looking into it and into the topic. And Karen Tonino at the U of S, she's a research group here. She was looking at some wheat and figuring, okay, what makes wheat more drought tolerant compared to, well, what causes the variation of drought tolerance in some wheat germplasm, which is, of course, the different genetic lines they use to breed. And she found out in her group that using the synchrotron, I don't know, it's a fancy microscope, you don't need to know much about that, but they found out that zinc is in elevated levels in the tissues of the more drought tolerant lines. And so I think this is really cool when you think about the grand scheme of things. And during my literature review, everything from pistachios to canola, it seemed that potassium, copper, zinc, and calcium were all being linked to both drought and frost tolerance. So extremes on both ends of the tipping table. And each of these nutrients, we all know, has major roles in maintaining cellular integrity. So water expands when it freezes. It just blows the cell right open. That's how you get your damage. And heat stress is all about keeping water in the cell. So in my mind, if we want resilient crops in our fields, this is now our basic checklist for tissue testing levels. And I'm going to leave it to all the agronomists on the call saying that, this is your assignment to figure out where you're falling short in the presence of solid water-driven yield potential. So we have, we're looking at traits that, increase abiotic stress tolerance in the field, improve varieties, bigger yields, of course, that's what we all want in the end. But on the plant breeding side, we have a rapidly advancing area of trait discovery. And obviously, we have big expectations for seeing these results transferred into our fields. But I'm here to give you a big dose of reality. And that's, we have our regular GM crops, so canola, corn, and soybeans. You're looking at, 4 to 6 years, breeding pipeline has been sped up. And then everything else at best is 8 to 10 years. And even the mutation breeding timeline here is quite optimistic. And so, of course, I want to give a quick plug here because, with all this development with protein industries and, of course, the pulse plant in Manitoba popping up, I just thought I'd touch on a couple sensitive crops here when it comes to abiotic stress, given that, blast is achieved at a much lower temperature compared to, our wheat and canola. And, our field peas, cool season crop, lots of genetic diversity, but there's not much heat tolerance. So in the future, it's like, okay, might increase yield, but it's not going to be through heat tolerance. And then our outlook for chickpeas is alarm bells have been ringing for quite a while, but it's just because of low genetic diversity. But there are heat traits that have been recently discovered, but at best, due to our Phanomyces root rot situation, being not the main focus of breeding programs, we're not going to see improved abiotic stress traits for another 10 to 15 years. Oops. So I really want to focus in on this, because in the business of farming, selecting your seed is one of many boxes on your checklist. But we have to remember that there are many bigger battles that we are fighting that will help us gain bushels while we wait. So I want to welcome you all to my grade 2 drawing class, where water drives everything. Elston, have you trademarked that phrase yet? I don't know. So in general, something I really want to bring up here is that an S790 weighs 20 metric tons. The biggest Borrego air seeder out there is 48,000 pounds, and a 600 horsepower Steiger weighs 24 tons. So you're nuts if you don't think that doesn't have consequences with going over your fields many times a year. And so being an official, hockey official, do a lot of junior and senior, I really like thinking about compaction in general as a 2-0 lead, just the most dangerous lead in hockey. We get complacent when in-season moisture is good, but it really comes back to bite us in the ass like a snapping turtle when times are tough. And this is, usually in those tough times, you want to, kidnap the meteorologist, but it's just the way she goes. But when we look at years in heat stress, those roots are gonna, their drive is going deep to get to those moisture reserves. But with compaction, the toll the stress takes on the crop is magnitudes worse. So we're definitely, with compaction, you're leaving bushels out there even when crop prices are high due to issues due to stress, aka drought. So now looping back to plant breeding and biotech, I'm here today to honestly tell you that biotechnology is not going to save you from your current and future compaction in your fields. The root phenotyping crowd right now is going nuts over a gene called DRO1 and heralding it to stop droughts, but this is a major oversight. It might work when it's in a 3D lattice made out of, fancy rubber, and it's in a hydroponic system, but in our fields where you have compaction layers that are solid as concrete, those roots are not going to penetrate it. So now it's time for Elston to dunk on this alley-oop I've set up for him, and let us know that we can have more resilient cropping systems in 2022 and beyond. So Elston, I'll let you take it away there and let us zone in on stratification and a bit more compaction stuff.
Awesome, Grasshopper. What's going on here? So what I want to get to here is, again, it has a little bit to do with the reallocation concept. There's a lot of things that we could be doing in Western Canada that are being done all over the planet that we refuse to do. And I gave you quite a list of what those items were. Liming, tile drainage, things like that. But here's one thing that I know is going to happen for sure in the future. And it all relates to a little bit of, or quite a bit of what Tyler did an excellent job of discussing at quite a detailed level. Every one of our fields out there are becoming increasingly stratified. That means immobile nutrients are concentrating on the top. pH is an issue in the top couple, 3 inches in many, many millions and millions of acres in Western Canada. And organic matter is also accumulating there, which is awesome. But at some point, we got to start thinking about what all of these factoids in terms of stratification mean to our long-term sustainability or enhancement of the resource. I actually hate the word sustainability. Enhancement is the word that I like. Couple that with the fact that compaction impacts almost every field out there, and there's usually 2 layers, one that's shallow and thin and one that's deep and thicker, and we can get into the reasons for all of that for another day. Also, since 1985-ish, we've pretty much been mining as an industry phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, and micronutrients. The only nutrient that has gone up in terms of total application has been nitrogen over that period of time. So we've got, about 3 different things going on here that are double, triple plus ungood. If you haven't read 1984, that won't mean much to you, but you should read 1984 because we're living through it right now. And then we have the love affair with narrow openers and wider row spacing, which makes for all kinds of other agronomic issues. And so while this part of the conversation might not help us much for 2022 in most cases, again, it's a discussion about the reallocation and a little bit about the future and opening people's minds. So if we can go for a little jaunt through a few fields here, and just bear with me. Here's what we do with narrow openers and limited amounts of opportunity to place nutrients. I'm using a 10-inch row spacing. Most of us are on 12s. Some are graduating to 14s and 15s. And for some crops, that's great. For other crops, it's not so good. And now is when we have to start thinking like plants. Especially we got to start thinking like young plants and what those young plants are experiencing early in the growing season. So the recommendation on the screen is for a 40 bushel or 45 bushel canola crop, taking into account soil tests and stuff. And yeah, it's aggressive because we're hoping to blow that yield goal out of the water, but there are the numbers. And so in the good old days, when I was a young feller on the farm, we pretty much broadcast everything except some of the phosphorus that we put in the seed row. And if you take it to one extreme, that's what the plant is seeing. It's seeing those nutrients scattered around in the soil, and everything's hunky-dory. What we're doing today, ever increasingly, is we're putting more and more nutrients in a side band or a mid-row band. And so once you do that, what the plant sees is not the recommendation. It sees something dramatically more intense. And what we're actually doing, the number one thing that we should be focused on as agronomists and farmers is growing roots. And as soon as we start doing this, we're creating zones of root death or root exclusion. And we've got to figure out how to get around this going forward, because this is a very big limitation to our yield potential, because we're hammering that baby little crop right off the get-go. We're shrinking its root systems, et cetera, et cetera. And then to take it to the next extreme, if we put everything in the mid-row, which nobody does, but if we did, then that gets accelerated and we have even a bigger concentration of toxic soup. So we got to figure this one out. And the way to figure it out is to apply nutrients over time and space. That's what a plant wants. And one of the advantages of products like Biosol or Super KS or the other products that are coming down the pipeline is it forces us to spread nutrients out over time and space. And just like the guys that I talked about earlier, cheap anhydrous in the fall, so they got most of the nitrogen that they thought they needed in the ground for a relatively inexpensive price. But now we have to dwell on the issues that Terry talked about. We got to source plant growth regulators. We got to source fungicides. We got to spend a bunch of money that we otherwise didn't need to spend because we didn't know, or we didn't react to the agronomy in the soil. So this is a big issue for Western Canadian and dryland agriculture in many, many places. And so bottom line message here is we need to spread nutrients out over time and space, because that's what a plant wants. The engineers might not like that, but that's what the plant wants. And then here's just an example of one of the very first experiences I had with this issue of stratification on a good friend of mine many years ago. All of the phosphorus and all of the potassium are basically found in the top 3 inches. And I can tell you that we followed up here a couple times and that's gotten even worse. So from a plant's perspective, if you're in a dry situation and you're chasing water and you have no phosphorus or very little phosphorus below the top 3 inches, or very little potassium, or very little whatever the other immobile nutrient is below 3 inches, that's a problem, especially when you're growing rapidly. And we saw a tremendous amount of that last year with sure growth tissue tests, some of the best tissue testing that I've ever seen in Western Canada, and other folks that are trying to emulate that. Once the plant gets below that top 3 inches and it's chasing water and it's growing rapidly, your tissues begin to crash dramatically. And that ties back into what Tyler talked about earlier in terms of stress management. If you don't have the nutrients at depth to help you with that stress management, and zinc, by the way, is highly stratified, you got a problem. Couple that thought with some work that well, here's the compaction issue. And obviously it's a exaggerated situation maybe, but you can see 2 distinct layers there, and this is from the US someplace. This is stuff that Dr. Jim Beaton, senior agri-coach with AgriTrend back in the day, a buddy of mine, he's quite a bit older than me, even though I'm an old fart, but in his text, that's the best text on the planet, that soil fertility and fertilizers, the 4th edition, if you can grab it on Abe books or whatever, grab it because it's gold. He related to this many years ago already, that this whole placement of nutrients at depth, whether you know, and the alleviation of compaction, if you can get the compaction fixed and you can put the immobile nutrients at depth, there's some really big yield advantages. And this is old research that we need to start replicating for our conditions in Western Canada. And I know most people probably think I'm crazy because I've been pounding this drum forever, but I know before 2050, we're going to be doing a lot of this stuff. So in the shower the other day, I was thinking about all of this stuff, which I'm prone to do in the shower. And it occurred to me, one of the first autonomous units that we should build is a deep till minimum till ripper. There's nothing worse than sitting behind a steering wheel or whatever and going very slowly across acres and acres and acres. So let's design an autonomous minimum till deep ripper that will also allow us to place nutrients in behind the rip zone. And because it's a minimum till unit, it will create the least amount of rocks as possible, because most people just discount this whole concept because of rocks. I can tell you, I've been to enough countries around the planet where, yeah, they get rocks, but they know how to handle rocks. And there's some pretty funky technology out there. So if we did this right, autonomous ripper, we can get rid of the 2 layers of compaction. We can place immobile nutrients at depth, and we can eliminate the mind numbing operation of going back and forth across the field at very slow speeds. And I got some data there that you might or may not agree with. And I have a couple of friends in North Dakota that are actually doing this. They don't have the autonomous ripper, but I've talked to them and they would love to have that on their farm. And so just some pictures. We played around with a 0-till ripper, an AgriPlow years ago. This is actually from one of the farmers that I know in North Dakota that converted his into a fertilizer applicator. There's other options out there, certainly from every manufacturer on the planet. They don't necessarily all have the ability to reduce, to rip, eliminate compaction or minimize compaction, and to also place fertilizers. But here's just some pictures. So a lot of people assume that if you're ripping, you're going to really mess up everything. And again, this is from the States someplace, and you can see that there's not really a huge amount of disturbance here on the surface, but there is certainly a huge amount of disturbance below. And some more pictures. And then I ran into this machine where they're actually strip tilling in narrow bands and then applying fertilizer at quite some depth. So it's not the same concept, but if you could strap this puppy on behind the autonomous minimum till deep ripper, I think we would make some massive gains in terms of water use efficiency, nutrient use efficiency, abiotic stress fighting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So a little bit of a mind bender perhaps, and I know there'll be lots of reasons why we can't do all of this stuff, and that's typically what happens when a newer concept comes to the plate. And this is actually not that new globally, it's certainly new locally, but there will typically be 30 to 100 reasons why not to do something. And for the younger agronomists and farmers on the call, we can't get around the issues of stratification, compaction, and all of those things leading to, and also the nutrient placement that we're dealing with, narrow openers, wide row spacing. We got to figure this shit out for the future, and hopefully I'll hang around long enough to see some significant movement in that direction. So I think that's it for Mr. Solberg.
Sweet.
I hope I twisted a couple of minds.
Yeah, mind bending stuff for sure. We'll see how true these practices and traditions, or these practices, get implemented. It'll be interesting to see. We had some comments here. Mitchell McPherson was asking about, based on the soil moisture example you're using, Elston, there, how much trust do you have in that data? Terry, will you be targeting 70, 80 bushel canola or not? And Terry graciously replied here, Mitchell, there's always many factors and abiotic stress that will affect yield. This is our total potential from a water perspective. We will be targeting 50 to 60 bushel canola on the farm this next year, based on the area on the farm, station data, snowfall, lots of snow in the area this year, pretty good snowmobiling. We will split apply nitrogen with about 50 to 70% at seeding, and topping up in season based on our stations, so that we can be pretty flexible there. The crop intelligence yield predictions in season are fairly accurate. The seasonal planning takes a little bit more interpretation of the big picture. Great comments here from Edgar Hammermeister. Thank you for participating, Edgar. Current and future federal mandates on fertilizer use, along with carbon taxes, will force a more sophisticated approach to crop nutrient management. Indeed. Who else had a question? There was another question here, a good one for Elston, from none other than Robert Sake. Elston, as the nutrients concentrate, should we consider turning the soil once every 20 years or so?
Oh, Rob, you turkey, you know, I've been talking about this for 20 some years, and yes, absolutely. But whenever I bring up the topic, I got to be on a Zoom call, or if I'm in a crowded room, I got to make sure I've got my the newest, fastest Nikes that this fat body can carry, so I can get out of the shrapnel as quickly as possible. People are doing this stuff. Just before COVID hit, I was in Western Australia, and they're farming beach sand, but they're doing it in a controlled traffic manner. And every so many years they plow, and every so many years they rip. And until you actually walk those fields and look at what's going on in those fields in terms of beach sand, I'm talking beach sand, and those crazy buggers are deep plowing and deep ripping every so many years, because of course sand is one of the first textures that will compact like crazy, even though they're controlled traffic farming. So think about controlled traffic farming, 20,000 acres, and then think about having a system where every so many years on every one of those acres you deep plow it, and then think about ripping. It's being done all over the world. It's just over here it's different. You just don't understand it's different here, so we can't do it here.
Okay, well, we had some comments here from Mark Gordon saying the Soil Warrior demo is coming to Melfort this spring. I wanted to just ask, I got two Shark Gordons here, so forgive me if I get the wrong one. Mark, we were wondering, I guess, a little bit more about that Soil Warrior demo, and also what you're doing agronomically for your clients this spring. Are you able to share that? Is this the one and only Shark Gordon? Going once, going twice,
Yep.
going three
And
But you have
times.
to unmute him.
Asked to unmute.
No,
Are you there?
I'm just saying Mark left, LOL.
Oh no, I got the, well,
I-
there's two of you. Okay, we're good. I'm gonna try this other one.
How about now?
There you go.
There we
How
go.
about
Oh,
now? We're good. We're good.
give us the soil warrior off the top rope now. What's going on?
Well, Elston planted this seed a long time ago, and up in Melfort here, we see that all the time. Like stratification is horrible. So inherently, isn't that where strip till started? Was deep banding nutrients, loosening up compaction, and that's a question.
I think that actually started more with the seed burn. When you look at down
Oh,
south
yeah.
with corn, because that's what they use to warm up the soil more. And because of course tillage warmed up the soil a bit more, and then they had a nutrient placement there as well. So then they just able to go there with their planters. So that's why all the strip till units you see are on like 24, 30 some inch spacing.
Yeah. So you look at the soil warrior machine, which is in I believe they're in North or South Dakota, caught my eye because you can get a machine on 20-inch spacing. Well, you think about all of our 10-inch space drills with mid-row banders, we're banding on 20-inch spacing already, which to me works fine. And it also, you can go to a coulter machine or a shank machine that is specifically built for going to, depths of 6 or 7 inches deep, which to me, that's just, we have guys currently fall banding P and K and nitrogen trying to place that stuff 6 inches deep, but it takes a ridiculous amount of horsepower and time, and kind of left with a bit of a rough seed bed, where I see this machine going through straw, leaving a nice field finish, kind of keeping to what that conservative tillage mandate, and fractioning ground, placing nutrients deep.
Mm-hmm. And I would definitely advocate in terms of going for the shank compared to the coulter, just for better nutrients or accurate placement.
Yeah, I agree.
So Mark,
Do you have
I just
anything
opened
else
up
to add on the nutrient front? How you're handling things with the customers this spring, or?
Well, and I think you guys kind of touched on, but you think about that stratification and where we're pulling water from. It's just the evolution, like Elston said, is the evolution is just going to happen. We can't be placing nutrients an inch deep and then expecting our big yield potential, crop water driven yield potential, to be sucking that from the top when the soil's dry, right? So deep placing nutrients is just going to be a natural evolution for Western Canada.
Great insight. Thanks for that.
Actually, Mark, it's a re-evolution, because back in the day when I was a young fella, maybe even younger than you, it was very typical to deep band nutrients 4, 5, 6 inches deep. It was normal in the fall. And then we got abnormal with all the advantages of direct seeding and everything else. I just looked up the soil warrior thing. That's a cool website. So maybe it's happening, and we need more guys like you to keep pushing that envelope. It's awesome.
Elmer Kasky is asking, would incorporating an alfalfa crop in rotation do much the same as deep ripping? Who wants
Yes,
to take that?
I'll take it. My grandparents and my dad used to deep rip our solonetzic soil biologically with sweet clover. And so actually the combination of some mechanical ripping with some biological ripping is absolutely a big chunk of the future. And everybody gets a real massive hard on or whatever with regenerative agriculture. And if that isn't the best case scenario where we can combine forages with some intelligent mechanical stuff, I don't know what is. It's a no-brainer. It's awesome.
No slide, I guess, on the hard on, but that's good. We can just skip right over that. Jake Legui, when talking about strategically tilling fields every so many years, what depth are we talking about? Deep ripping or using a chisel plow cultivator to mix up the top 3 to 6 inches of soil, or both? Who wants to take that one?
I'll take a run at it. So it depends. It depends on where your compaction layers are and how stratified your soil is. And that's the piece that everybody misses. Typically, the biggest mistakes we make in the realm of ripping and stuff is we've got a 600 horsepower tractor that can pull a unit that can go 23 inches deep. And so that's what we do. But the place that we need to focus in on is where is that deeper, thicker compaction layer, and often it's only down, 11 to 14 inches. And once you go below that sweet spot, then you're actually probably doing more damage than good. And I guess the other piece is, well, that's the most important piece. And that's the biggest mistake. The other biggest mistake is people rip when the soil's too wet, so you don't get, proper fracturing. And then the other piece that I've learned from my two buddies in North Dakota and looking around the world is a lot of our soils are challenged with sodium or magnesium, so you can shatter them, but as soon as they get wet, chemically, the chemistry takes over and they re-weld, right? So my whole concept for years has been, if we can get some calcium in that zone of ripping with some immobile nutrients as well, then the calcium is going to keep those zones open. And then if we could put in some deep rooted crops that have already been mentioned, we've got a lot of things working in our favor, right? So it depends, Jake. It depends. You're going to be different than, somebody 200 miles away.
You mean everybody's soil and farm isn't the same?
Yeah, it's not. Oh, go ahead.
It depends.
It depends. Favorite
It's
answer
not
from
about,
agronomist.
it's not about blanket application. It's about strategically going after it.
I just thought of something in Western Australia. It doesn't depend, because all of those crazy mothers are farming land that is very, very similar. And so that's one exception. But for most of us in Western Canada, we got brown, dark brown, black, thin black, gray, Solinets, Chernozem, blah, 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 blah. It depends.
Here's one more perspective. Grant Mickelson, what say you?
Hey guys, yeah, no, our conditions are probably similar to a lot of Western Canada right now, coming off a very dry, hot year, and it's a gut check time, I think, for agriculture right now, and looking at farm businesses as a little different structure than just growing a crop and seeing what the yields are and what grain prices look like. We have to look at the profit potential and the profit margins, and that's the reset I'm thinking that we're doing more in our part of the world right now, is talking about where's the profit opportunity. And right now we've got 37 moisture probes in our client base, and we are using them for end of the season right now, looking at a snapshot of what was in the soil before we took out, just like Elston and Terry have commented on. And out of all those 37 probes, there's potential to make money. And that's, I think, the end of the day, we have to understand where's the potential. We're not going to hit the bumper yields if we get an average rainfall this year, but we're going to have profit opportunities. And right now we're looking at 2 probes sitting in the soil. Batteries are dead, obviously, from the cold weather, but in the spring we'll get the batteries up and running again and take a snapshot of that soil moisture profile from the winter infiltration, and we'll have an opportunity to readjust or reset or be confident in the fertility strategies that we're doing. So I think that's one of the things that we're looking at and more intensely using these moisture probes. We've been using them for 7 going on 8 crop seasons, and they've been a phenomenal tool for managing risk and looking for opportunities in our farm clients. Just using the same example Elston had for his moisture probe. We use 50% of the winter moisture, and we're going to say medium agronomic potential just based off of last year. And we're not going to hit home runs, but we're going to see very profitable opportunities for farms. We're going to see moderate yields likely, unless we get inches and inches of rain. But with today's strong prices and the resources sitting in the soil that we've soil tested with, and confident with, we're going to see profitable opportunities for farmers. We do have guys deep banding up to last year. With it being drier, we pulled the equipment out of the fields early. We have been deep banding 5 to 6 inches, and that's helping with that shallow compaction layer. That's opening up that shallow compaction layer. So I think that's a first good step to stratification and also shallow compaction. And in the spring, we're going to start randomly sampling some fields just to see what the fertility looks like early in the spring if we did get some mineralization with the late fall rains after we sampled, and start moving the needle one way or the other if we need to.
Awesome
Just
comments, Grant. Yeah, go ahead,
Yeah,
Terry.
just to add to Grant's comments there. Yeah, like this is very, very good comments around the profitability. I mean, the reality is, there's a lot of tools that we have to become more efficient and make better decisions with data. I've always used the analogy, precision farming is really just about, increasing the percent return, or the chances of getting a return on your bet. It's just like card counting at a casino, right? And as the value of these inputs and their crops go up, typically the technologies that we're using either kind of stay at a similar cost, or in many cases even the cost gets lowered over time as technology and processes improve, and the value of what we can get just goes up and up and up. So in some cases we're going to be forced from a profitability standpoint to get there, or if we're not adopting the same technologies that others around us are, it's going to put pressure on the profitability of our business. And even without that, as commented earlier, like we are going to be at some point regulated around much of this stuff. And the reality is, when you look at some of the technologies that we have and how we can do things better with data and making decisions, some of the kind of old methodologies of blanket applications and treating the entire farm the same way is really, in all honesty, a bit barbaric or archaic compared to some of the very simple, cheap tools we have to implement now.
I think you meant to say methodologies, not that I ever want to correct my
Yeah,
younger
that's
brother
right.
on anything, but I love that you said mythologies, because
could be a
I think you're
It's
just
a myth.
making shit up, but it actually makes a lot of sense that a lot of these current practices are sort of, modern myths that are appropriate to continue doing, and we should be evolving past that. So it's a brilliant,
Terry,
brilliant
I
error.
think you hit a good point there, Terry, with data. I think that's an evolution of agriculture we all have to start to recognize as being valuable to farmers. Farmers not collecting data today maybe don't have the opportunity to look for those profit opportunities. But I think on the regulation side, as farmers can start presenting data to governments, to government bodies, to saying, hey, we are doing things right. We're soil testing, we're managing our nutrition. We don't need federal governments to come in and start regulating what we're doing. And I think that's maybe an opportunity that farmers and agronomists are missing right now. If we're not collecting that data, to bring it forward, to present that we are doing some really good things to protect our environment, we're going to have the government just come in and start to mandate and regulate what we're doing and tell us how to farm, which is probably not the best for the food consumption that we need, or world food consumption. So just my thoughts on data that I've seen this evolution in my head anyway, that I've been pushing hard this winter to showcase why we need data on farms. And it's not about making $1 per acre back on the data that you produce into your softwares, but it's how you use the data to be more profitable and valuable on your farm. But I think that collective data as a whole will help farmers become their own regulated body.
Change is happening faster than ever, regulatory speaking, on the consumer side and agriculture. It's never going to be status quo. Things are going to move faster and faster. And it's hopefully conversations like this that help facilitate some of the future change and open people's minds. So it sounds like we made some progress today. I want to thank all of the panelists, did a tremendous job. Terry and Tyler and Elston, keep up the excellent work at Sure Growth. Mark Gordon, Shark Gordon, up at Melfort there. Thanks for joining the call. Grant Mickelson, at Watrous, all part of the Golden Agritrend Network back in the day. So incredible attendance today. We had close to 80 on the call. You're all our people. We appreciate you. Lots of great industry folk, farmers, agronomists. We appreciate you spending your precious time with us, and we'll put the recording up. We'll send you that, and we're looking forward to picking the brain of the agronomists in our network on a continual basis going forward. So expect more topics and more webinars and more quality conversation like you experienced here today. So have a great Friday, everybody.
Hey, Dano.
Yo,
Dano,
Elston, yo.
before you leave, a couple things for me, and I've already stole them. So they're gonna get replicated. Terry's misstep or whatever, and methodology and mythology, brilliant. And Grant Mitchelson, oh my God, that was
Pretty
unbelievable.
inspiring, eh?
Yeah.
Well, there's one more celebrity agronomist that would like to leave his mark on history on the internet on our YouTube. I'm asking him to unmute right now, Mr. Robert Sake. That big
Yeah, just bouncing off of Grant. Just bouncing off of what Grant was saying. We have to be really careful with the federal government and their nitrogen plans right now. The target is to reduce nitrous oxide emissions by 30%, but they're not taking into account precision placement. They're not taking into account slow release. They're not taking into account variable rate. They're not taking into account a whole bunch of stuff. So the more data you can accumulate, this is going to be a firefight coming up, because what they want to do is they want to judge nitrogen utilization in the country by precipitation, topography, and region. And they multiply those things out, and they say, this is how much crop you're going to grow. Therefore, the only way to achieve a nitrous oxide reduction is by reducing absolute nitrogen by 30% to achieve their target. So we need lots of this data. Elston, there's going to be a big fight here as we try to come up with this nitrous oxide reduction targets from the federal government.
Thanks
I'm
for
a
that.
lover, not a fighter, Rob. Kidding.
Maybe you can love the federal government enough to make them change. Is that
No,
gonna work out?
Rob's right. And yeah. This would have
Awesome.
been a great year for that, to make better nitrogen decisions.
Okay.
Good point, Rob.
All right. Thanks everybody for attending. Thanks to the panelists, and we'll see you again soon with some quality conversation information, I'm sure. Thanks, Terry. Thanks, Tyler. Thank you, Elston. Thanks, Short Gordon. Grant
Have a great day,
Mickelson.
everybody.
Thanks, Rob. Take care, everybody.